Welcome back to Doomsday Prepper. Today we're diving into one of the most explosive geopolitical scenarios imaginable. What if the United States annexed the Gaza Strip? The region is already a flashpoint for conflict, but US annexation could ignite a global firestorm. From military escalations to economic collapse and domestic upheaval, this scenario has serious SHTF potential. Would America become the world's most hated nation overnight? Could it trigger World War III? And most importantly, how should preppers prepare? Stay tuned, and if you haven't already, subscribe to stay ahead of every possible disaster. 1. The political fallout. The US annexing Gaza would be an unprecedented move in modern history. The international backlash would be immediate and severe. The United Nations would likely pass multiple resolutions condemning the action, and American allies in Europe might find themselves under pressure to distance themselves from Washington. NATO could face internal fractures, as member nations like Turkey, which has strong ties to the Palestinian cause, might refuse to cooperate with the US on military and diplomatic levels. The Middle East would erupt in outrage. Countries like Iran, Saudi Arabia, and Turkey would likely respond with economic and diplomatic warfare, if not outright military intervention. The Arab League would call for an immediate response, and even historically neutral countries might feel compelled to take a stance against the US-American embassies worldwide would be at high risk of being attacked or sieged, forcing the US to evacuate personnel from hostile regions. At home, the political landscape would be thrown into chaos. Democrats and Republicans alike would be divided. Pro-Israel factions might celebrate the move, while those opposed to interventionism would condemn it as an unnecessary and dangerous provocation. Protests would break out in major cities, and domestic terror threats would skyrocket. The situation would be volatile, and the repercussions could be felt for years, if not decades. 2. Immediate security threats. By annexing Gaza, the US would instantly make itself the #1 target of every militant group in the Middle East. Hamas, Hezbollah, and potentially even ISIS remnants would see this as an all-out declaration of war. Rocket attacks, bombings, and insurgency warfare would escalate immediately. American troops stationed in the region would face relentless ambushes, IEDs, and urban combat scenarios, unlike anything seen in recent history. The risk of a terrorist attack on US soil would also increase dramatically. Islamist extremist groups, already active within the US in small sleeper cells, could be activated to launch mass casualty attacks. Cyberterrorism would also surge, with groups targeting infrastructure, financial institutions, and even government databases. Preppers should take note. This means securing both physical defenses and cybersecurity measures at home. Israel, America's closest ally in the region, would also become a primary target for revenge attacks. If war erupted between Israel and surrounding nations, the US would be dragged further into the conflict, forcing even more military deployments and increasing the risk of a broader regional war. The reality is simple. Annexing Gaza wouldn't just affect the Middle East. It would put every single American at risk. 3. Global military response. A move as extreme as annexing Gaza would not go unanswered. Iran would likely escalate its military activity, possibly launching missile strikes against US assets in the Middle East, such as bases in Iraq, Qatar, or Bahrain. Russia and China, both looking for an opportunity to weaken US global influence, could respond by providing military and economic support to opposing forces. The risk of proxy wars and direct military confrontations would be at an all-time high. Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, IRGC, could start targeting US forces in Syria, Iraq, or even Afghanistan, despite America's withdrawal from that region. China, already engaged in economic and political tensions with the US, might use the situation as a justification to invade Taiwan, knowing that America's military focus would be elsewhere. In the worst-case scenario, the situation could spiral into World War III, a multi-front war involving the US, Israel, Iran, China, and Russia would devastate global economies, disrupt trade, and lead to widespread destruction. Preppers should prepare for the possibility of supply chain disruptions, fuel shortages, and even military conscription. The world as we know it would never be the same. 4. Economic collapse risks. Even if a full-scale war were avoided, the economic consequences of annexing Gaza would be catastrophic. The Middle East controls a significant portion of the world's oil supply, and many OPEC nations might refuse to sell oil to the US in retaliation. This would cause gas prices to skyrocket, leading to increased transportation costs, food shortages, and overall economic instability. Countries like China, one of the largest buyers of US debt, could retaliate by dumping US Treasury bonds, causing the value of the dollar to plummet. Stock markets would go into freefall, triggering a recession or even a depression. American consumers would see inflation explode, making everyday goods and essentials far more expensive. For preppers, This means reinforcing food storage, investing in alternative energy sources, and securing assets like gold or cryptocurrency to hedge against financial collapse. Those without strong supply chains or backup financial plans would struggle to survive in the face of this economic disaster. 5. Cyberwarfare and infrastructure attacks. If the US annexed Gaza, cyberwarfare would become one of the biggest threats to national security. Nations like China, Russia, and Iran already have cyber capabilities that can target power grids, water supplies, banking systems, and communication networks. If a coordinated cyber attack occurred, millions of Americans could lose access to their money, electricity, and even clean drinking water. Hackers could also disrupt the stock market, further crippling the economy. The fallout from such an attack would be devastating. People unable to access their bank accounts, grocery stores unable to process payments, and hospitals struggling to operate without digital infrastructure. Preppers should take this threat seriously. Stockpile cash, alternative energy sources, and off-grid communication tools like ham radios. Cyber attacks don't just affect big businesses, they impact everyone. 6. Martial law and domestic unrest. If the US annexed Gaza, the resulting chaos, economic turmoil, terrorist threats, and mass protests could push the government to declare martial law. In major cities, protests from both pro-Palestinian and anti-war activists would likely turn violent, forcing authorities to deploy National Guard troops and riot police to restore order. Clashes between law enforcement and civilians could escalate, leading to mass arrests, property destruction, and widespread civil unrest. Under martial law, civil liberties could be suspended. Curfews might be enforced, movement restricted, and social media censorship heightened to control the narrative. Preppers should be ready for internet blackouts, mass surveillance, and potential firearm confiscations. If the government perceives unrest as a direct threat to national security, military-style checkpoints could be set up, making travel and bugging out more difficult. Urban preppers should have a low-profile survival strategy. Stockpiling essential supplies is crucial, but so is blending in to avoid drawing attention. Alternative communication methods like ham radios and coded messages may become necessary if traditional means are restricted. Those in rural areas should prepare for an influx of urban refugees, which could strain local resources and increase tensions. The key is adaptability. In a martial law scenario, self-sufficiency and situational awareness will be more critical than ever. 7. The draft and military expansion. Annexing Gaza would likely lead to a massive military escalation, stretching US forces thin across multiple fronts. If the conflict expands into a larger regional or global war, the government could reinstate the draft, forcing young Americans into military service. Historically, the draft has been highly controversial, sparking protests, civil disobedience, and mass resistance movements. The draft would impact families, businesses, and the workforce. Parents would fear for their children's futures, while companies could struggle with labor shortages. The political divide would deepen, with many questioning whether this war is worth fighting. Draft dodging could become widespread, leading to a resurgence of underground networks helping people evade conscription. For preppers, this means making contingency plans. If you have draft-age family members, consider relocation strategies or ways to legally delay or avoid conscription. If you're a business owner, anticipate workforce disruptions. For those unwilling to fight, options might include moving to rural areas, securing medical exemptions, or seeking alternative assignments within civilian support roles. Regardless of your stance, the draft would mark a major turning point, and preparedness is key. Keeping identification documents, medical records, and essential survival supplies ready will be crucial in navigating this potential crisis. 8. Domestic terrorism threats. One of the most immediate dangers following the annexation of Gaza would be the rise of domestic terrorism. US military actions in the Middle East have historically triggered retaliatory attacks, but full annexation would take the threat to an entirely new level. Islamist extremist groups, lone wolf terrorists, and radicalized individuals could see this as an opportunity to strike on American soil. Potential targets would include major cities, New York, Washington, D.C., Los Angeles, etc. Public transportation hubs, airports, subway systems, train stations. Critical infrastructure, power plants, water supplies, communication networks, government buildings, and military bases. Cyber terrorism could also increase dramatically. Hackers might target banking systems, hospitals, and emergency services, leading to widespread panic. A coordinated cyber and physical attack could cripple the nation's ability to respond effectively. Preppers must take security seriously. Be aware of your surroundings, avoid crowded locations when possible, and have multiple escape routes planned in case of an emergency. Invest in home fortifications, personal defense training, and emergency communication methods. If cyber attacks disrupt essential services, have backup power sources and cash reserves ready. In times of high terrorism threats, staying off the radar, limiting unnecessary travel, and maintaining operational security, OPSEC, are key survival tactics. 9. The fallout of failed annexation. If the US were forced to withdraw after annexation failed, the global fallout would be catastrophic. America's credibility as a superpower would be shattered. Allies might distance themselves, NATO could fracture, and adversaries like Russia and China would exploit the situation to expand their influence. A failed annexation would also have profound economic consequences. Massive military spending, potential sanctions, and further instability in oil markets could send the US into a deep recession, or even a depression. The value of the US dollar could plummet, making imports more expensive and leading to hyperinflation. Social programs could face severe budget cuts, pushing millions into poverty. Domestically, the political divide would widen. Pro-war and anti-war factions could clash in violent demonstrations, possibly triggering another wave of domestic unrest. Government distrust would reach an all-time high, fueling radical movements on both sides of the political spectrum. Preppers must prepare for economic collapse, civil unrest, and potential loss of global resources. Strengthening community networks, securing barter goods, and diversifying income streams will be crucial. If the US loses its superpower status, expect a new world order where survival skills become more valuable than ever. 10. How preppers should prepare. No matter how this scenario plays out, preppers must be ready for the worst. The US annexing Gaza would create an unstable world full of geopolitical, economic, and security risks. Here's what you need to focus on. 1. Stockpile essentials, food and water. A minimum 6-month supply is ideal. Energy sources, solar power, backup generators, and fuel reserves. Medical supplies, first aid kits, antibiotics, and trauma gear. 2. Strengthen home security, reinforce doors and windows to withstand potential home invasions. Install surveillance systems to monitor activity around your property. Train in self-defense and firearms used to protect yourself and your family. 3. Develop communication strategies. Ham radios and encrypted messaging apps can be crucial if infrastructure collapses. Establish a local prepper network for coordinated response efforts. 4. Prepare for economic collapse. Diversify assets. Hold some cash, gold, silver, or cryptocurrency. Grow your own food. Establish a survival garden or aquaponics system. Learn barter skills. In a cashless society, trade will be essential. 5. Stay informed and ready to adapt. Follow global events closely. Geopolitical shifts can affect preppers instantly. Remain flexible in your plans. Adaptability is the key to survival. If you found this breakdown valuable, hit that subscribe button for more SHTF scenarios. The future is unpredictable, but with preparation, you'll always have the upper hand. Stay ready, stay aware, and keep prepping.